Thank you on behalf of the International Society for Quality of Life Studies for joining this webinar titled Human Flourishing and the Global Flourishing Study, presented by Dr. Tyler VanderWeele. Now, let me introduce our speaker. We are very honored to have with us Dr. Tyler VanderWeele, and he is the John Loeb and Francis Lehman Loeb Professor of Epidemiology in the Departments of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. He is also the director of the Human Flourishing Program and the co-director of the Initiative on Health, Spirituality and Religion at Harvard University. He holds degrees from the University of Oxford, the University of Pennsylvania, and Harvard University in mathematics, philosophy, theology, finance, and biostatistics. His research is focused on theory and methods for distinguishing between association and causation in the biomedical and social sciences, and more recently, on psychosocial measurement theory. His empirical research spans psychiatric and social epidemiology, the science of happiness and flourishing, and the study of religion and health. He is the recipient of the 2017 President's Award from the Committee of Presidents of Statistical Societies. Dr. VanderWeele has published over 500 papers in peer-reviewed journals. He is also the author of a number of books, all of them are bestsellers, and he writes a monthly blog posting on topics related to human flourishing for Psychology Today. Dr. VanderWeele, I'm not going to take more time. Thank you very much for being with us. We are very honored, and the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Well, it's a pleasure being with you all today. Thank you for the kind introduction. I will be presenting on the Global Flourishing Study, and while I will go through some of the initial empirical results, I will also spend quite a bit of time talking about the design and the nature of the study and the motivation for it, because this is, as I will discuss, an open access data resource, and so we hope that many of you will make use of it. I do want to acknowledge our partners as well. The Global Flourishing Study is a joint effort between the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard University and the Institute for Studies of Religion at Baylor University, with data collection carried out by Gallup and the data hosted by the Center for Open Science. I do also want to acknowledge the generous support of our funders, a consortium of 8 funders, including the 3 Templeton Philanthropies, along with the David and Carol Myers Foundation, the Fetzer Institute, the Paul Foster Family Foundation, and Wellbeing for Planet Earth Foundation, and the Wellbeing Trust. So I will provide a brief overview of the conceptualization of flourishing and some of the measurement approaches that we've been using, not only in the Global Flourishing Study, but more broadly in our work on flourishing at the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard. I'll spend a fair bit of time discussing the motivation for and the design of the Global Flourishing Study, as well as our thinking on the analysis plans and our coordinated efforts to carry this out. I'll then go through some of the initial results of the Wave 1 of the study data. I'll talk about some of the strengths and limitations of the study and offer a few concluding remarks. More information on the framework we've been using for flourishing can be found in this 2017 paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. More information on the results I'll be presenting and the design of the Global Flourishing Study can be found in our flagship paper, Nature Mental Health, on the study, and a whole series of papers that I will be alluding to as we go through can be found in a special collection for the Global Flourishing Study, jointly hosted by Nature and Springer at this website here. More information on the and the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard can be found on our website. So what is flourishing? Well, if we turn to our dictionaries, the Oxford English Dictionary defines to flourish as to grow or develop in a healthy or vigorous way. The American Heritage Dictionary, to do or fare well. The etymology of the term comes from Latin florere, to bloom, blossom, or flower. It's the word often used to translate Aristotle's eudaimonia, sometimes also translated as happiness. The working definition of flourishing that we've been using at the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard is that flourishing is the relative attainment of a state in which all aspects of a person's life are good, including the context in which that person lives. So understood in this way, flourishing is all-encompassing. It includes all aspects of a person's life. It is multidimensional. We may be flourishing in certain ways, but not others. it also constitutes an ideal. It's not something we ever perfectly achieve in this life. There's always room for improvement. And then finally, it concerns also the context, the communities, the environments in which a person lives. The community's well-being is part of one's own flourishing, if flourishing really does include all aspects of a person's life. But we can, of course, also focus on the individual aspects of flourishing, what one might call individual well-being. Well, I do think well-developed understandings of flourishing are going to vary across cultures and traditions and religions and philosophies. I think a good place to begin is what many of these understandings of flourishing hold in common. And so what I would argue is that whatever else flourishing might consist in, a reasonable conception of flourishing, any reasonable conception of flourishing, would include the following 5 domains of human life. Not that flourishing is reducible to these 5, but that whatever else flourishing might include, it would include these 5 as well. And these are happiness and life satisfaction, physical and mental health, meaning and purpose, character and virtue, and close social relationships. Again, the argument's not that these exhaust flourishing, but that each is a part of it. I think each of these domains also satisfies the following 2 criteria. Each is nearly universally desired, and we now have empirical data on this from the Global Flourishing Study. And each is an end in itself. It's sought for its own sake. It's not merely a means to other ends. And I think those 2 criteria, being nearly universally desired, being an end, can help shape some consensus around what to measure. So as a crude measure of flourishing, we've taken 2 questions in each of these 5 domains, drawn principally from the existing well-being literature, questions that are in widespread use and that have received some degree of empirical validation, as a brief assessment, and that's been very helpful in epidemiologic contexts and other cohort settings to be able to insert these 10 questions in a variety of settings. So this has been picked up, for example, in the Nurses' Health Study at Harvard with over 100,000 participants, in the ISQOLS study in the UK, and the Japanese Aging and Gerontological Epidemiologic Study. So while there are better and more extensive assessments of flourishing, I think this brief assessment can be quite helpful for multi-use cohort studies. And so these 10 questions, which we include in the Global Flourishing Study, amongst others, as I will get to in due course, are as follows. First domain, happiness and life satisfaction. Our first question, how satisfied are you with life as a whole these days? From 0, not at all satisfied, to 10, completely satisfied. And this is perhaps the most used question in the well-being literature. It's been used in the UK's annual survey. It's been used by Gallup. It's in this year's US National Health Interview Survey. And then we supplement that with something more affective in nature. In general, how happy or unhappy do you usually feel? From 0, extremely unhappy, to 10, extremely happy. Second domain, physical and mental health. These are just standard self-report health questions from the US General Social Survey and the World Health Organization's Mental Health Survey. In general, how would you rate your physical health? 0 to 10. How would you rate your overall mental health? 0 to 10. The third domain, meaning and purpose. First question, overall, to what extent do you feel the things you do in your life are worthwhile? From 0, not at all worthwhile, to 10, completely worthwhile. This question is also very widely used, once again, by the OECD and the UK's annual survey and many cohort studies around the world. And then we supplement that with something more cognitive. I understand my purpose in life. From 0, completely disagree, to 10, completely agree. Fourth question, character and virtue. First question intended in some crude way to try to get at notions of practical wisdom and justice. I always act to promote good in all circumstances, even in difficult and challenging situations. From 0, not at all true of me, to 10, completely true of me. And then second question intended in some crude way to get at notions of fortitude and temperance or moderation. I am always able to give up some happiness now for greater happiness later. And then the fifth domain, close social relationships. These 2 questions were drawn from the UK's Campaign to End Loneliness survey of short social connectedness assessments. First item, I am content with my friendships and relationships. From 0, completely disagree, to 10, completely agree. Trying to get, in some sense, at the quantity of those relationships. And then my relationships are as satisfying as I would like them to be. Trying to get at the quality of those relationships. We typically report the results separately across these 5 domains because, as you'll see, dynamics can be quite different across the domains. Sometimes we'll average all 10 questions as a crude assessment of flourishing, but really this should be understood as nothing other than the average of those 5 more meaningful individual measures. We typically supplement these 10 questions with 2 others on financial and material stability as important means to sustain those other ends. These 2 questions, drawn from the financial well-being literature, are first, how often do you worry about being able to meet normal monthly living expenses? From 0, worry all the time, to 10, do not worry at all. How often do you worry about safety, food, and housing? Again, we'll typically report this domain separately as well. Sometimes we will average all 12 questions for a more secure measure of flourishing, perhaps less satisfactory conceptually, since financial resources are arguably means, not ends, but perhaps more satisfactory in practice, indicating flourishing over a longer period of time. So these 12 questions were part of the motivation for and used within the Global Flourishing Study, but we have much greater conceptual coverage of flourishing and its determinants in the study itself. And so with that, I will turn to the Global Flourishing Study. The Global Flourishing Study is a study of over 200,000 individuals in 22 different countries, geographically, culturally, religiously diverse countries on all 6 populated continents, representing about 2/3 of the world's population. With intended 5 waves of annual data collection on the same sample of 200,000 individuals. Sampling within each country is nationally representative, roughly, and it's a longitudinal panel study, so each individual is followed up once a year for 5 years. So this was an advance over the Gallup World Poll, which takes a separate cross-sectional sample every year. This is an open access data resource hosted by the Center for Open Science. So all of you and anyone else is welcome to access it. But upon submission of a pre-registration, though, it will be, first 2 waves will be fully open access, essentially just click and download as of April of next year. But the first wave of data was released in February of 2024, the second wave of data in April of this year, and we are nearly finished with the 3rd wave of data collection. These are the 22 countries that were included within the study, and again, taken all together, representing about 64% of the world's population, with representation in all 6 populated continents. And the motivation for this study was to understand the distribution of different aspects of flourishing worldwide, and to try to address over time with this longitudinal panel data what seem to be the key determinants of human flourishing. And to what extent do they vary by country and context? What might be universal across these different countries? What might be culturally specific? We hope over time to discern what the effects are of childhood experiences, family life, religion, community, work, personality, politics, economics, character, and various aspects of human flourishing. So the survey itself consisted first with a brief intake survey where we asked various demographic and socioeconomic questions along with retrospective assessments of childhood experiences and predictors from the past. And then the first wave and every subsequent wave had a annual survey with the same set of questions each year, asking about those 12 flourishing index questions, but also a host of other questions on well-being and health, including constructs like balance, peace, harmony, mastery, and so on and so forth that aren't included in the primary flourishing index. And then various questions on social support and community, character, personality, religion, spirituality, and various political, economic, national questions as well. This is a list of the constructs that are assessed within the study. So quite a number on general well-being, quite a number on health and health behaviors. a number on financial and economic considerations, a fairly long list on religion and spirituality. The Templeton Philanthropies were the primary funders of the study, and so this was of particular interest to them. But then a number of questions also on relationships and community, along with notions of government approval, political voice, sense of trust, discrimination, and then a handful of additional questions also assessing various aspects of character. Most of these constructs were assessed with a single item, and so that is certainly, and I'll come back to this, a limitation of the study. In some sense, the study is a mile wide and an inch deep. There were a few exceptions. Depression and anxiety, for example, were assessed with the brief PHQ-4. So in some cases, validated scales, but most of these were assessed with single items. Those single items were chosen in dialogue with experts in each of these areas, questions that tended to be strongly correlated with longer scales and had evidence for longitudinal predictive capacity. We did release the initial draft of the survey for global feedback, and we had 160 scholars from all over the world comment, and about a third of the questions were modified or eliminated or added during the course of that. But again, each of these constructs is typically assessed with a single indicator. These are the countries, again, represented within the study and the sample size in each of the countries. We were typically aiming at 5 to 10,000 participants in each country. The United States had a much larger sample size because it was the one country where Gallup had an existing panel study that we were able to make use of. And all these other countries' infrastructure had to be developed to build panel study. In most cases, we did manage to get between 5 and 10,000 or more participants, but there were some exceptions. For example, we had extreme difficulty with regard to data collection in Turkey. So sample size there, for example, is only 1,500. One of the interesting things about the study and the analysis that we've conceived of in the process of designing this study is that we've pulled together a research team drawn principally from Harvard's Human Flourishing Program and Baylor's Studies of Religion and friends of those programs, but to carry out a coordinated series of analysis. So each researcher in this team takes ownership of a single construct. So for someone, it might be hope. For another person, perhaps happiness. For another, education. For another, income. And are carrying out a series of papers on this particular construct. So in the first year of data collection, we are first looking at each construct and simply providing descriptive statistics. So how is hope distributed across these 22 countries and across the demographic categories? How does this vary by age and gender and education? And how do those relationships vary by country? So someone will do this for hope, and then the next person will do exactly the same analysis, but with happiness. And then the next person with forgiveness. And then the next person with meaning in life. But the analyses themselves are identical. And then in the first year, we are also looking at how the retrospective childhood predictors multivariately predict the construct outcome of interest in adulthood. So how do childhood experiences shape hope? And then the next researcher, how do childhood experiences shape happiness? The next one, how do they shape meaning in life? And so on and so forth. Reported across the different countries, and then, as I'll come to, meta-analyzed for an overall summary across the world. In year 2, which we are analyzing right now, we're looking at how does particular construct indicator, how does hope, for example, affect flourishing 1 year later, controlling for essentially everything else in year 1. And then in year 3, we'll do this in more of a lagged manner. And in year 4, we'll be looking at mediation analyses and joint effects over time and so on and so forth. But the analyses for each of the researchers on this core team is essentially identical. We are reporting separately by country because of issues of interpretation and trying not to assume measurement in variance. So the primary analyses are done separately by country. One might view this as a series of 22 closely related but distinct cohort studies. But then we are, as a summary, meta-analyzing the results in each of the 22 countries. And again, using meta-analysis rather than multi-level models so as to avoid assumptions about measurement and variance. So our primary meta-analysis is a random effects meta-analysis, sort of treating the 22 countries as having drawn from an underlying distribution of countries. As a sensitivity analysis, we are doing also country population size weighted meta-analyses. So India and later China receive a lot of the weight in the sensitivity analyses, but the random effects meta-analyses are essentially treating each country as the unit. So as I said, in the first year, we're carrying out 2 series of analyses on each of these constructs. One concerns the demographic analyses, where we're reporting the demographic distribution over age, gender, marital status, employment, religious service attendance, education, and immigration status. And then at the country level, race, ethnicity, and religious affiliation, we're not able to carry out meta-analyses for those because the categories differ across countries. So that's table 1. Table 2 is simply reporting the ordered means and confidence intervals with Gini coefficients for the underlying construct. So for hope, what does this look like across countries? Same for happiness, and so on and so forth. And then lastly, how does that construct indicator, how does hope vary across groups defined by those demographic characteristics, by age, marital status, employment, religious service attendance, so on and so forth. And so we do this again for each of the constructs. One of the interesting things about the study and our analyses, and so far as I'm aware, this may be unprecedented in the history of science, is that we, through this special collection of journals in Nature and Springer, the editors agreed to joint methods review. So all 50 papers on the demographic analyses were using common methods, and those methods were evaluated simultaneously and reported in this paper on analytic methodology for the demographic analyses in BMC Global and Public Health. And then when each individual paper was sent out for review, the reviewers were told the methodology has already been evaluated. You can feel free not to comment on that, really just focus on the framing and the introduction, the results and their interpretation, and the placement within the literature, framing within the literature. And so again, it was been an interesting process carrying out these joint methods review. And that was also the case for our childhood predictor analyses, where we were doing multivariate regression models with regard to how do different childhood experiences assessed retrospectively predict the outcome of interest. So this was essentially taking, a given outcome indicator, hope, and then the next researcher, happiness, and then the next researcher, meaning in life, and regressing it on age, gender, race, ethnicity, religious affiliation at age 12, marital status of the parents, relationship with mother and father, whether the participant in childhood felt like an outsider growing up, whether it experienced abuse, their religious service attendance, self-rated health growing up, and subjective socioeconomic status of the family growing up. We do think that these multivariate analyses, because the childhood predictors are assessed retrospectively and we have multivariate control, are a step towards providing evidence, certainly not conclusive, but evidence for causality. But of course, may be subject to unmeasured confounding, and so we do report sensitivity analyses for how robust or sensitive the results are to a potential third factor that's unmeasured that might affect both the childhood predictors and the outcome of interest. We do so through reporting of e-values. I'm not going to go into detail here, but more details in the paper cited here. This has become very popular technique in the biomedical and epidemiologic sciences, and to a certain extent in the social sciences. I think over 5,000 uses to date. But we are trying to take these methodologic matters seriously. And again, the whole series of papers was had joint simultaneous methodologic review in this other paper in BMC Global and Public Health. So I will briefly comment on the big picture results for the Flourishing Index, but again, a whole series of papers are reporting on the individual aspects of flourishing. So if you average over those 12 flourishing indicators and simply list the means of these 12 indicators across the countries, the list might not be what you had anticipated and looks a little different, for example, than what one finds in the World Happiness Report focused on a single question on life evaluation. But if you average over these 12 countries, you find at the top Indonesia, followed by Israel, Philippines, Mexico, Poland, and Nigeria. Most of the countries, numbers 9 through 20, all are right around 7. Those all fall between 6.8 and 7.2, and we really probably shouldn't make too much of those differences since there are matters of interpretation of the questions and translation and scale responses. There are a couple of outliers. Turkey reported especially low, as did Japan. Turkey 6.79, Japan 6.32. And then some outliers on the top: Indonesia, Israel, Philippines, Mexico, Poland. And I'll come back to the interpretation of these later. And why we might be observing this. In many cases, if we just look at life evaluation, Sweden, which kind of falls in the middle here, rises to the top. If we just look at life evaluation, it comes second of the 22 countries, but much lower levels of meaning in life, of pro-social character. And so I'll comment on that a little bit later. When we aggregate across all countries in the meta-analysis, we find that flourishing tends to be increasing with age. Traditional patterns of age and well-being focused mostly on happiness and life satisfaction had been more U-shaped, with older people and younger people tending to report higher, and those in midlife, perhaps struggling with young children and aging parents and career challenges, reporting lower. But at least with flourishing, and we find this to a certain extent as well with life evaluation and life satisfaction, that left part of the U has been flattening. And so the patterns look now overall, when aggregated, more increasing or perhaps J-shaped rather than U-shaped. There are exceptions. In Poland and Tanzania, for example, flourishing is decreasing with age. Gender differences aggregated across the 22 countries tend to be fairly small, but this varies by country. Women report higher flourishing than men in Japan, and the reverse is the case in Brazil, with men reporting higher flourishing than women. Replicating a lot of work previously, though mostly, again, just focused on happiness and life satisfaction, we do find, perhaps unsurprisingly, that flourishing is reported higher by married individuals than single individuals, but not everywhere. Single individuals report higher levels of flourishing in in India and in Tanzania. Again, flourishing is reported higher for employed and self-employed compared to the unemployed. Unsurprisingly, flourishing tends to increase with education, but not everywhere. The pattern is reversed in Australia and Hong Kong, where flourishing decreases with education. So again, raising interesting questions as to why this might be so, which we hope to uncover in subsequent waves. Flourishing and replicating a lot of prior work tends to be higher, those attending religious services or with other forms of community engagement. Just as an example, when aggregated across these 22 countries, if we look at that composite flourishing and look at the different age categories, it tends to be fairly flat through age 49 and then steadily increases, really up through 80 and older. But the patterns really do vary by country. This is reporting by age category in the 22 countries. Our overall flourishing in blue, along with life evaluation in red, Cantrell's ladder, and a life satisfaction question in green. In most countries, the pattern across those three assessments looks fairly similar, not identical. Often that life evaluation measure is somewhat lower than composite flourishing or life satisfaction, especially in middle income countries, but we see that in many countries, flourishing is increasing with age, including Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Germany, Japan, Spain, Sweden, United Kingdom, United States. But again, not everywhere. It tends to be somewhat decreasing in Poland and Tanzania. India, it's still more U-shaped, for example. With regard to our childhood predictors analyses, a lot of this is perhaps unsurprising. Good relationships with mother and father in childhood tend to predict higher flourishing later in life. Same with those who had a comfortable subjective financial status in childhood, those who had excellent self-related health, those who attended religious services weekly, all tend to report higher flourishing later in life, controlling for all of the other childhood factors as well. And then children whose parents were never married, or possibly those who had one died or divorced, tend to report lower flourishing later in life. Those who experienced abuse or felt like an outsider growing up, again, tended to report lower flourishing growing up. But there is variation across effect sizes, and there are some surprising exceptions, which I'll come to in due course as well. But just as an example of these results and the variation across countries, if one looks at religious service attendance in childhood, controlling for all the other childhood predictors, and looks at composite flourishing in adulthood, you see a bit of a dose-response pattern where those who report greater levels of religious service attendance, controlling for the other childhood predictors, report higher levels of flourishing. But the effect size does vary across these countries. So pretty large effect sizes, for example, in Poland and Japan and Turkey and in Hong Kong and Israel, ranging from those kind of 0.5 to 0.7 to essentially null results in a number of other countries. Again, why this might be so, we're still trying to uncover. You'll see the countries with the largest effect sizes include fairly religious countries like Poland and Turkey, and also fairly secular countries like with low levels of religious participation, such as Japan and Hong Kong. And again, each of the papers carries out these and more analyses in each of the countries for each indicator. And so you can find more information in that special collection for the Global Flourishing Study. A number of the patterns are not dissimilar to what we find with flourishing, but typically with every outcome, we do find a handful of exceptions. For example, self-rated health tends to, perhaps unsurprisingly, decrease with age rather than increase with age, though not everywhere. In the United States, somewhat shockingly, self-rated health, self-rated physical health is increasing with age. This is really, I think, a concern with regard to what is going on with young people. And in contrast to the overall flourishing results, men do report notably higher physical health than men overall, but not everywhere. In Japan, women report overall higher physical health than men. Self-rated mental health and emotional well-being patterns fairly similar to flourishing, but perhaps slightly more U-shaped here with age. Again, a lot of the results on composite flourishing, either descriptive in the demographic analyses or in the childhood predictor analyses, which are kind of synthetic longitudinal studies, replicate a lot of what has been reported previously in the well-being literature concerning patterns with employment, marital status, education, religious participation, though now with a more global coverage and with a broader set of flourishing measures. Again, the demographic analyses are intended to be purely descriptive, not causal. The childhood predictor analyses are intended to suggest some evidence, though again, not definitive for causality. And as we go forward, we're trying to understand the differences across countries. In terms of big picture conclusions, I think one is really the patterns with age and flourishing. And I think this is a real concern. Young people seem to be not doing as well as they used to be. And we need to discern whether we can better support the well-being of young people. It's also not clear, and we really can't discern from the present data, whether this is kind of a newly pattern aged effect, where because of the social and economic structures in place, people now just tend to do better and better as they age, or whether this is perhaps a cohort effect, so that the young cohorts today will, in fact, over time, as they age, experience a U-shaped pattern where their well-being will go down before it goes up, which would be of particular concern. And again, only subsequent years will reveal which of these might be the case. And this perhaps isn't predetermined. It may depend on whether we do more to support the well-being of young people and of subsequent generations. Second big picture takeaway, I would say, is different countries are flourishing in different ways. Richer developed countries tend to report higher levels of financial security, higher levels of overall life evaluation. But interestingly, middle-income countries tend to report higher levels of meaning and purpose, higher levels of pro-social orientation, higher relationship quality. With meaning in life and GDP per capita, in this data at the country level, this is actually negatively correlated. As an illustration of this, Sweden, which tends to come at the top or towards the top of the World Happiness Report rankings using contralateral life evaluation, does very well on that question in the Global Flourishing Study as well. It's second of the 22 countries. But if you look at meaning in life, they're 19th of the 22 countries. And so these patterns with meaning, relationships, character, explain some of the differences between what we find in the Global Flourishing Study, using a broader set of measures and what one finds in the World Happiness Report. And I do think this raises critical questions with regard to how can we carry out economic development, which is so important, without compromising meaning and purpose and character and relationships? And to my mind, this is the most important question that the Global Flourishing Study raises. But then a big third big picture takeaway, I think, concerns religion and spirituality. Religious service attendance was one of the most consistently associated variables, both in the demographic analyses and in the childhood predictor analyses across a whole range of outcomes. So might the lower levels of more humanistic, eudaimonic forms of well-being in richer developed countries in this data be because of declining religiosity and spirituality? I think it's striking that the one high-income country in the study that reports among the top on composite flourishing is Israel, which has relatively high rates of religious service attendance. So do we need to reconsider and possibly support spiritual pathways to well-being? I think another open question that needs further investigation here are patterns with adversity and flourishing later in life. And as I said earlier, in most cases, childhood adversity predicts lower levels of flourishing in adulthood. But there are some intriguing exceptions. In Israel and South Africa, more adverse socioeconomic status those individuals report lower levels of adult pain. Is this kind of a developing of resilience? In the United States and Argentina, those with more adverse socioeconomic status in childhood report higher levels of adult meaning. Has that struggle led to greater levels of meaning? Childhood abuse and feeling like an outsider across almost all outcomes results in lower levels of flourishing. But there are intriguing exceptions. Those individuals report in adulthood higher levels of all of our pro-social behaviors, higher levels of volunteering, giving, charitable giving, and helping others. Though lower levels of self-report, subjective, showing others love and care. So interesting, intriguing results. But I think leading to questions of under what conditions and what responses to adversity might lead to growth rather than further decline. Certainly we should try to address these issues of suffering and adversity whenever we can. But when we can't undo the past, how do we use adversity to enable flourishing? When suffering can't be eliminated, how do we transform it? And what are the limitations of such approaches? So study strengths and weaknesses. I think strengths are large sample sizes, diverse range of countries, a wide coverage of constructs, nationally representative sampling, longitudinal panel data collection. Weaknesses are, again, the assessment of these constructs are often just with one or two indicators. Initially, limited follow-up, though again, we're nearly completed with Wave 3 data collection. We had real concerns, and this is to a certain extent still concern around attrition. Wave 2, our retention rate was 62%, which given the range of countries involved, I think was pretty good. We are reasonably happy with it. Looks like we'll be landing at about 54% with Wave 3. So the largest fall really was, as often is the case, between wave 1 and wave 2. So certainly not perfect, but reasonably good, but certainly a limitation of the study as well. And then perhaps both the strength and a weakness of the study is the same questions across countries and cultures. A strength with regard to allowing some sense of comparability, but a weakness with regard to not being tailored to the specific culture and context. Some of the analysis strengths were consistent methodology, use of sensitivity analysis, measured confounding and measurement error, large sample sizes to deal with multiple collinearity, multiple mutation for missing data, but some weaknesses as well. The childhood predictors were assessed retrospectively, so potentially subject to recall bias. Certainly the childhood predictor analysis also subject to potential unmeasured confounding. And then responses may have been influenced by matters of translation, modes of assessment, different interpretation of items and response scales, and seasonal effects as well. So I do think the Global Flourishing Study provides foundational knowledge that helps understand how better to promote flourishing, to understand who needs help and in what ways, and how this might vary across countries, points towards the importance of preventing childhood adverse experiences, but also understanding pathways to resilience and growth. Again, I think the big picture takeaways and the open questions is, are we sufficiently investing in the future, in the subsequent generations and youth of today? How can we carry out economic development without compromising meaning, purpose, relationships, and pro-social character? And are we neglecting or potentially even suppressing powerful spiritual pathways to flourishing? This is an open access resource through the Data Center for Open Science, so we hope many of you will download this data and make use of it. We look forward to learning from others as well. And I do really think that what we measure shapes what we discuss, what we know, what we aim for, and policies put in place to achieve those aims. And so we hope by measuring and studying flourishing, we will, as a society, better seek to promote it. I want to thank again our funders and collaborators, especially Byron Johnson, the other PI of the Global Flourishing Study at Baylor University. But thank you so much for being here, and happy to take comments and questions.
Dr. VanderWeele, thank you very much for this inspiring and interesting exposition on the Global Flourishing Study. I have to say that I already used this data, and it's one of the best panel data I have used in my life. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
We are going now to go to the Q&A session. So please, I would like to invite all the attendees to turn your camera on and to ask any questions by raising your hand first for Dr. VanderWeele. So please, if you would like to do that, now it's the moment. We will start with a question from Annie Tubadji. Annie, I don't know if you would like to turn your camera on and ask the question directly. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the wonderful presentation, for the fantastic data set, and for the interesting insights that you shared with us. I was just thinking about the findings that you had about religiosity, that the potential explanation might be that higher unhappiness in the place of living is the reason why you find higher effect from the engagement with religion there. So religion is always alleviating the pain from loneliness and so on. And where it is needed more, it is more effective. Just the opposite of the disenchantment. Where the enchantment is necessary, the effect from it is higher. So maybe a food for thought.
Yeah, I mean, we could look at that and see if there's a relation between overall flourishing levels and the effect size of religious service attendance. It's certainly not perfect because Israel reports towards the top on flourishing. It was the second highest, and Israel also has one of the largest effect sizes for religion. Japan tends to report towards the bottom on flourishing, but also has one of the largest effect sizes. So, I mean, again, we could look at that,
there is cultural
it really
persistence
is
also
quite
in this, isn't it?
variable.
So
I mean, I can pull the pull the data up up again. But at a first glance, and this isn't a formal
Well, I
analysis,
see
but
there and
it
Japan
really
and Turkey and
varies
UK.
a lot. um, Philippines, which reports high flourishing, is kind of right in the middle for effects. Again, it's not clear that would play out. But it's an interesting hypothesis, and it is there are limitations with regard to what we can do with 22 countries at the discerning the country level variation. I mean, individual level explanations, I think over time we'll be able to handle fairly well with the very large sample sizes, but with 22 countries, the country level explanations, again, one can speculate, I think, in interesting ways, but
And the
hard to be
second,
definitive.
a
I mean,
question.
okay, yeah.
A question that I was wondering, further extension of what you have added as questions, is the participation in culture and arts, because this is also very well known to relate to aesthetic experiences and so on. And it can help distinguish between the cultural heritage, which is religion and so on, for more related, and things which are living culture related. So how they transform and how they become not traditional. So what can you extend the data?
Yeah, so we do actually, between years 1 and 2, and this data is also already available, we did a brief retention survey with about 10 additional questions. These aren't going to be asked every year, but one of those was engagement with the arts. So that data is now available. We have engagement with the arts, social media use, experiences of beauty, engagement with nature, engagement with work. And so that data is available and publicly accessible
And will it be repeated, however, in a later period, so you can make differences in the?
We hope so. We don't yet have that data, but and wave 4 will be identical to waves 1, 2, and 3, but we're hoping with wave 5 to be able to do something more creative and to include those mid-year questions again.
Yeah.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you, Annie, for the questions. Lilian?
Yeah, hi. I actually also have 2 questions. First is, so different cultures, and you have questionnaires from 1 to 10. I lived in many countries, and in one country, I am pretty sure one from your court, if you ask about how happy you are, the level of happiness will be 10, even if it is not 10 is the highest, but country I'm living currently, the highest level of happiness, if you ask the completely happy person, it will be 8. In the best case, okay? So how you deal with the understanding of what the highest level is it might be the same level of happiness in 2 persons.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important point. A few comments to offer. First, we are essentially treating this as 22 distinct cohort studies. So we are not making claims that there's real comparability across countries. There's matters of translation, and there's matters of, and I think you are getting at this as well, response scales. There's evidence that in some Eastern cultures, perhaps especially Japan, on 0 to 10 scales, there's a tendency to report closer to the middle. One doesn't want to exaggerate or boast. And so unquestionably, that's some of what's going on. It is intriguing, though. We have not just 0 to 10 response scales, but also binary yes/no questions. We have a few Likert scales as well. And you see, at least with subjective well-being, Japan reporting lower even on binary questions. So when you ask, do you have, a close friend that you can share things with? Japan reports the lowest percentage of all of the countries. Again, so while some of this might be response scales, I don't think that's all that's going on. But the phenomena you described is unquestionably true. In Tanzania, for example, it seems there are quite a number of respondents who report either 0 or 5 or 10. Almost treat it as a Likert scale. So I do think the cross-cultural comparisons need to be done cautiously because of these issues. And that's part of why we're treating these as essentially 22 separate cohort studies. We're using meta-analysis rather than multi-level models, because we are not claiming that the measurements are comparable across countries.
And if I can, the second question is shorter. It's about time-dependent parameters like PTSD, like exercising. It might change from more frequently than once a year. Okay, so what you are doing with this possible middle value?
Yeah, and I mean it is an issue. We obviously we don't have that. Exercise, I think it's asked in the last week or the last 2 weeks, how frequently have you exercised? With the PTSD trauma question, was there ever an experience of trauma in your life that's still affecting you today? But of course that could vary over time as well.
I started
It's a
exercising
limitation
2
of the
weeks
study.
ago. I'm an exerciser in your cohort, right?
What was that?
If I started to exercise 2 weeks ago, so I'm perfect exerciser in your cohort.
Yeah. Again, we'll have a better sense with multiple years. It's still limited because we don't know what happened in the 50 other weeks, but there will be a better sense as to that variation and persistence. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Lilian. Dr. VanderWeele, I also would like to ask you, is there any possibility to maybe extend the panel data to more than 5 years and maybe to more countries and maybe to add other dimensions like digital habits? I thought that this could be interesting in order to transform it step by step to a global panel study that can take maybe, I don't know, 20 years, maybe. It will be great. I think that you have the power and the capacities to do that. Thank you.
That would be the goal, and we would love to see that happen. The constraint is the money. This is an extremely expensive study, and we've only just managed to secure Wave 4 funding. So if you know of any funders who would be interested in extending this subsequent waves, Wave 5 is not even guaranteed at this point. So to subsequent waves or to other countries, we would welcome that. And there are now a few countries that have considered sort of self-funding the inclusion in the study. It's really too late for Wave 4, but Wave 5, if all goes well, we're hoping to, in some sense, redesign the study, add more questions, add more countries, maybe have a replenishment sample for those countries which have had largest attrition. In Wave 4, we are going to begin some AI-guided qualitative interviews as well. And in Wave 5, we would hope to extend that to all countries. We may be doing family-based data collection in Wave 5. Again, all of this is sort of resource permitting. We do have one question on social media engagement in the mid-year survey, but it would be great to extend that further. But right now, our chief constraint is funding for the study.
Thank you. Shanfei, please.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Dr. Teller. I would like to ask you about how in your study for different countries have different, let's say, political systems and cultural similarities, how this take considerate in your research. But I mean, what I'm thinking is for some countries, the political system never been changed or changed very, let's say, frequent. And then that in a way may change, like train their citizen how they express their feeling or their flourishing. And also, have you done any research on the related clusters? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, as I commented earlier, it is somewhat difficult to look at country level factors well because we only have 22 countries. So one can run some of those analyses, but given sort of we only have 22 units, it's at best speculative. I mean, I do think this is where other modes of inquiry come into play other than quantitative analyses. I mean, we do have, and this is at the individual level, notions of government approval and levels of trust, and whether individuals feel they have political voice within a country. But one can do perhaps more speculative cultural work. This wasn't in my presentation, but comparing waves 1 and 2, we found the largest falls in Hong Kong and in Nigeria, 0.7 of a point in both countries. And if one looks at what was going on in Nigeria, inflation rates were at the highest levels in 30 years. So the economic struggles probably explain some of this. We had speculated that in Hong Kong it might have been new security monitoring laws, and I was actually in Hong Kong last month and was talking to people there and offering the speculation. They said, not really. A lot of this was in place prior, effectively, and they thought it was really economic there as well. So again, these are insights that we can't really discern by just analyzing the data, but and are more speculative rather than definitive. But I think that sort of work on political systems is probably as best one can do with the GFS data, given that we have 22 countries.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So we are reaching the end of the webinar. So we would like to say that thank you everyone for participating in Dr. VanderWeele webinar. Please be sure to participate in all of the ISQOLS webinar sessions. We'll be posting this recording and all the other session recordings on our ISQOLS platform soon. And thank you, Dr. VanderWeele. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you.
It was great to have you here.
Yes, being here. And maybe I'll just briefly respond to the final question in the chat. Most of the questions are asked annually, but the intake survey when we were recruiting included the childhood predictor questions and a handful of questions on personality and political affiliation. Those were only assessed once, and then the mid-year questions were only assessed once. Everything else was assessed annually, so that's why you'll find some difference. But again, it really was a pleasure being here with you. Thank you for the good probing questions and insights. I wish you all the best, and please do make use of the data. We look forward to learning from all of you as well. So thank you all again.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Dr. VanderWeele, thank you on behalf of ISQOLS for your time, for your presentation. Hopefully we'll be in touch. We'll include you in future presentations.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you all again.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.